hear me okay now?
You're fine.
All right. You look good.
Thank
You ain't put on no pandemic weight.
you.
All right, so let's start. Let me just run it down. Okay, we have Mr. Leroy Jones, a.k.a. the Keeper of the Flame. Your credits run like, I don't know, like a musical library. You've worked with Harry Connick Jr., Lillian Boutte, John Boutte, the Preservation Jazz Band, Big Chief Monk Boudreaux, Dr. John. You were on the Sleepless in Seattle soundtrack. Then we're going to take you way back. You've been in the business so long that you played on the Arsenio Hall show. So we're going to get into that. But welcome, and thank you for taking your time to speak with me about who you are, what you're working on, your new music, and why you are still a musician.
Thanks for having me on.
So can you just tell me, how did you start off as a musician? I read that you were a band leader at the age of 12. Is that correct? Like, what are your musical roots?
That is correct. And I started taking music lessons when I was 10 years old. I started in school band here in New Orleans. I was involved with the art and music program here. And many of the schools had bands back in those days. This was 1968. And I was at St. Leo the Great Elementary School. And my first instructor was a trumpet player. She played all the other instruments as well, being a band master and band director, Sister Mary Hillary at St. Leo the Great School. And she saw that I had exceptional ability, musical abilities, and persuaded my parents to, well, she didn't have to do much persuasion with them, but she encouraged them to push me on and keep me interested in playing music. So the first 2 years, I started taking private lessons with her and also playing in the wind ensemble at the school. They did not have a marching band at St. Leo, but they had an ensemble that played the symphonic music. And so I picked up the cornet, of course, being someone who was influenced by Louis Armstrong. First off, Louis Armstrong was my first and foremost mentor. When I used to hear recordings of his being played in my household, because my parents, although they were not musicians, they loved music. Louis Armstrong's 78s and LPs were regularly in the mix. Mm-hmm. So that was my first experience to his sound, and I said, I want to play the cornet. I want to play the. So eventually, they bought me a new trumpet because I did so well on the rented one that they took me for about 3 months. I made so much progress in 3 months that Sister Hillary said, get him a horn, get him a new horn. So I got it. And then by the time I was 12 years old, I had been playing for 2 years. I was formally introduced to Danny Barker, who Danny was a jazz guitarist and historian, a mentor, and someone who started something that was starting to die in the late 60s and early 70s, and that was the brass band movement, at least awareness of the brass band, New Orleans brass band music within the young sect. And I was one of the first members to be chosen to be a part of the Fairview Baptist Church Christian Marching Band in 1970. And Danny lived around the corner from my house. Wow. And would hear me practicing in my parents' garage. I'd practice for hours on end when I'd come home from school, which is probably why they put me in the garage. So I wouldn't be
get boy out of here.
Played extremely loud, as most young students of the trumpet will do, and you could hear me at least a couple blocks away, which my sound caught Danny's ear, who lived just and also around the corner from the Fairview Baptist Church. So when the pastor, the Reverend Andrew Darby, asked Danny to round up some recruits for the church because there were not enough youngsters amongst the congregation playing instruments that were appropriate for the brass band. He knew Danny had connections in the music world in New Orleans, and he knew a lot of musicians, and he was in the know, so to speak. And he said to round up me some youngsters so I can complete this band. And so I was one of the first recruits.
Oh, wow.
And he appointed me as a leader. I was 20 years old because he saw that I was serious about my practice regimen, and he saw a maturity in me that he didn't see in many other youngsters that he had brought.
So you answered so many questions, because I was going to ask you, how much did you practice? Because for you to make such progress in 2 years, I think you must have practiced for hours and hours every day.
I would practice until my time to come.
Now, did you do the homework? Did you get your homework done as well?
First thing I had to do was my homework.
Oh,
so
wow.
I did my homework, and then I'd hit the garage. And usually about 30, I practice at least 2.5 hours. If I get 3 hours, I'd do 3 hours after I'd come home from school. And then that repertoire changed when I entered high school, because I went to St. Augustine High School for 4 years in band rehearsal after school. And so usually when I got home from the band rehearsal with the Marching 100 and the concert band there and or the stage band there, I was pretty exhausted.
I'm sure. Wow. So you've had discipline pretty much from out of the womb. I mean, it must take a lot of discipline to be so young to finish your homework, finish your education, your schoolwork, and then put as much or even more time into your craft. And I'm sure you had a vision, but did you even envision that you would be here today when you were 10, 11, 12 practicing?
Well, I didn't. And I ultimately, I would have been a musician. But I'll tell you this, I probably would not have developed a passion and a love for my culture, my New Orleans culture, and traditional jazz and brass band music, and just jazz in general, if it were not for my meeting with Danny Barker and being involved with the Fairview Brass Band and other brass bands that I had an opportunity to play with when I was a teenager. Bands like Doc Pauline's brass band, the Young Tuxedo Brass Band, and some of my my cohorts like Greg Stafford. You probably know Greg Stafford, the trumpeter.
Yeah.
And remember a guy named Anthony Tuba Fats Layson. Got to hang out with those guys who were a little bit older than me, and they showed me the ropes pretty much.
Wow. I'm a little jealous. But not really, because I'm getting the story. I'm getting all the tea. Well, I want to just go back a little bit because, at your very beginning working with Sister Hillary, what just impressed me is I haven't heard about many brass musicians that are women. It's definitely difficult to find a lot of women in a musician capacity in the music business, and particularly in brass. And I find it so interesting that your first teacher, your introduction to music is a woman, because one of the things that I really do love about your playing is it's so sensitive. And I got to share one of the songs that I love playing on my show, that I love the way you play it, is Sweeter Than a Summer Breeze. I'm just like wrapped up in that song. So can we just talk a little bit about, did you recognize how big of a deal that was to have a woman as your coach? I mean, sort of like this maternal feel?
I guess I didn't. I just, when I looked at her, I saw her as my instructor. And I at that time, the Dominican nuns were sort of coming out of the habit. So she didn't really wear a habit, so you could see her was, I have to say, she was the hippest sister that
Yes.
She played all of the instruments, and trumpet was her major. Was in university, and she was a trumpet major. And in the eighth grade, I did an eighth grade recital, and I played a classical piece called Polka Capriccio, and it's the same that she played uh, her recital in college, and I worked for the Louisiana Educators Music Association. They had these contests back then. I don't know if they still do that now, but all school students would either participate in ensemble or you do solos or both. And of course, I was involved with the ensembles as well, and I also did some solos. And that one particular piece, I rehearsed for several weeks and got a superior rating for my performance of it.
Yes.
First, it was a piece that she played, and she wanted me to play it.
Yes. I love it. Okay, so let's fast forward a little bit because I want to hear about how did you get acquainted with Harry Connick Jr. How did that part of your life start with working with Lillian Boutté and John Boutté and Dr. John? I mean, these are pretty notable acts and great company, and you are, just as incredible. How did this come to be?
I first met Harry, didn't really meet him, but I saw Harry at one of his father's campaign rallies back in 1974. Mm-hmm. And of course, I was 16 years old then, and I was playing for his father's campaign rally with the Leroy Jones Hurricane Brass Band, the original Hurricane Brass Band. So Harry would have heard me then. We didn't really get introduced to one another, but I saw him. He was, of course, he's about 9 years younger than me, so he's a little boy. And so after some years later, when he was going up to New York to pursue his career, and this would have been about 1981, between 81 and 83, and he was in his late teens. And he stopped by a club that used to exist on Bourbon Street called the Mahogany Hall. Yeah. Not the Mahogany Jazz Hall, which is now a new club that's on Chartres between Iberville and Canal. Okay. This was the Hall Jazz Club that was at the Dukes of Dixieland used to play at the top of the Monteleone Hotel. They closed that venue down for where they were performing at. They moved into the Mahogany Hall Jazz Club on Bourbon Street, which is now, Legends Park. It's right across from the Ross and Esther, and that block between Greenville.
Yeah.
The Mahogany Hall, and before that was the Paddock Lounge. And when I was playing on Bourbon Street for many years, I won't get deep into that because you're probably going to ask me some questions about it. But I was playing there with a singer by the name of Mary Mayo, and Emile Vanette was on piano. A guy named Curtis Mitchell was on bass, and another very young Shannon Powell was on drums. And,
oh, wow.
And clarinetist named David Grillier was playing the reeds. And so we had a gig there 5 nights a week. Harry stopped by and sat in, and the piano, and Emile, let him sit in, of course. And I'm going up to New York, and I said, "Oh, great!" And you sound great, and it was great to have him come and play a couple of numbers. And so I hadn't heard from him or seen him for a few years after that. I happened to be on a tour in Southeast Asia. I went to Singapore in the summer of 1985, and I was there with the Camellia Jazz Band under the leadership of drummer Trevor Richards, a British musician who had been living in New Orleans since the 60s. And the band was a quartet with two other older musicians from New Orleans there. One was Pud Brown on clarinet, and the other was the pianist Quentin Batiste. Both of those gentlemen are now deceased. But I went there, and I ended up staying there for a year. We had a 3-month contract that was extended for another 3 months, and then for another 6 months. And so, being there all that time on my leisure time, I would watch CNN Live with Larry King. So I happened to be looking up at the screen one night in Singapore, and I see this pianist and this bass player doing a duet together. It was Harry Connick Jr. and the bassist Ben Wolf, and there was this. They were talking about this film When Harry Met Sally, and I hadn't seen the film yet, and but I had heard and read about it and saw that Harry had done the music. It was his music that was underlaying the film itself, and it had great success. And I was so proud. I said, "Wow, look, Harry on Larry King Live," And I hadn't seen him since 1983. It would have been around that time, I think. And so a couple years later, two and a half years later, he's on national TV, on international TV, I should say. And so I was, I ended up staying over in Southeast Asia for almost 3 years, playing around different countries in that region. And I came back home in 1988 for a brief visit. Then I went back to Singapore in '89 and did 6 months, came home. And that spring or I should say spring of 1989, I got a phone call from Anne-Marie Wilkins Management, who handles Harry, asking me if I would like to be a part of this big band that Harry was putting together. Harry would be delighted to have you in his band. And I said, sure. And they were going to be starting, actually, I'm sorry, that was the fall of 1990, because the band started in June of 1990. So that's the correction. It was 1990, the spring of 1990. And I said yes. Harry had success with another album called We Are in Love that followed the soundtrack of When Harry Met Sally. And it prompted him to put his own band together to tour with. And so we hit the road for 2 months, June to July 1990. And it was all up and up from there. We were traveling all around the United States on the fancy tour buses, and flying a few places, and making appearances on the late night shows like you mentioned, Arsenio Hall. We even played on when Johnny Carson was still doing the Tonight Show before he retired. Later it was with Jay Leno. And David Letterman, we were on the late night with David Letterman, seems like every year, at least once or twice, we were appearing on there and doing things to promote Harry's music and his albums and the band. So that's how I got involved with Harry in the big band.
That's incredible. So during this time, were you thinking about your own music, or were you completely focused on being a touring musician?
Well, I was touring, and I also got an opportunity because of Harry to make my first, I would say my first legitimate recording with a label. Harry started a record label of his own called Nopti Records, but it was a subsidiary of Columbia Records. During that time, at that time, they were just about to be bought by Sony Music. So it was, I did an album called More Cream from the Crop in 1994. And Harry is really the one responsible for me having an opportunity to do that through his label, actually. And I didn't have to ask him for it. He thought that I deserved it, and he said, Lee, if you should make a record, and I did that album, and it was under Sony Music, and then I did a follow-up a couple years afterwards, 1996, an album that got good critical acclaim. It was a tribute to Louis Armstrong called Props for Pops, And at that time, I was beginning to incorporate some of my own original material on those recordings. And so, yes, I was definitely thinking about things that I wanted to do that would be more centralized on my particular style, and as opposed to being in the big band as a section player, as a soloist on the platform for Harry Connick Jr. So many opportunities came to me through being with Harry and the high profile gig that I was on with that band.
What a wonderful story about musicianship and camaraderie, and it just feels like the essence of New Orleans. That it's a family and it's a community, and people are looking out for one another. I love it. I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's fast forward to right now, because you just released a new record. Tell me what inspired this new project. How long has it been in the can? Why now in 2022? What are you saying? Give it to me.
It's my wife is a musician, Katya Toivola. She's from Finland, and she's a bit younger than myself, and we've been together now for 25 years. And I met her actually in New Orleans in 1996, and we started dating in 97, which was 1997 was her third visit to New Orleans. She's a trombonist, and she also plays bass drum in the brass band, and she's an ethnomusicologist, and which her interest in New Orleans and New Orleans brass band in particular brought her here because she wanted to do some research at the source, is what she did before she handed in her paper at the University of Helsinki. So we had a long engagement, and eventually we got married in 2006. And then we had a big to-do at the Ponko Jazz Cafe in 2007. And then in 2016, a baby girl came into our lives. Her name is Ada. And then 13 months later, a baby boy named Luca came into our lives. Those are the two that they're on the cover of the CD, you probably noticed. And they're both now 6 out of 6 years old, and Luca is 5. So when they were infants, as they got older, we were looking for really good children's albums and children's music, that music for children that was not corny or too retro or just, didn't make much sense, right? So we found some good stuff from the Baby Love Jazz series. Those were really nice, with Charlie Bird and Ella Elephant and Duck Ellington. You get the drift in. So I said, well, I could do something, that's, I think, hip and that would appeal to the kids, like maybe have them counting from 1 to 10 in 5/4 time, having them sing a new alphabet song instead of A, B, C, D, E, F, G. We could go A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Just change the melody on it and put some different chords under there, and have some trumpets back in it with mutes and some improvisation and some things that would hopefully stimulate their minds about improvisation and the language of jazz. And one song about the dog. Our miniature schnauzer is Tippy Tina, but her nickname is Peepoo. And you probably checked out that song. At the end of it, you can hear her howling because that's what she does sometimes. So I wanted to do an album of songs that are geared specifically for younger people. And I came up with the idea of March of the Toddlers. And that's what they were doing. They were marching around when they were toddlers. They're still digging it now.
That's incredible. You a family man too, and so creative. What's your favorite song off of the new album?
Uh, you know, I, if I had one choice to make, I would probably say it was the ballad "Toys." You know that
What a lovely melody.
oh, my sister's found her doll. It's all in the call for children. So I think that one, the ballad, that one kind of touches me even.
You know, you have shared this rich history. You started playing music at a young age. Obviously, you had the passion and the discipline to be in this business for what is it, 50 years? I'm not even math is not my strong suit, but it's about approximately 50 years, and you're still working as a musician. So, as a younger musician, I just love to encourage. I love to just talk to like my elders that I respect and ask them for advice. So, for any of the younger listeners or even the young at heart listeners, what advice or what wisdom and jewel would you share to anybody that's looking to pursue their passion and their dream, or wants to be the next Leroy Jones? What could you share with them?
Well, to all of the aspiring young musicians, artists out there, no matter what genre of music you're performing, uh, I would advise that you always treat your music with respect. Uh, Put your heart into what you're doing because that comes across when you perform. And there are people, listening audiences, and music lovers out there who may not play an instrument, may have never played an instrument in their lives, but who have grown up listening to music, or who may have just discovered music. We have a mission to bring the music to them on a level that it that separates it from music that is garbage music. There's some music that I think personally it's not, it serves no purpose, but good music, no matter what genre, serves a purpose to the people. We have to remember that we are performing for people, and music is healing. And there are many people, when they come to a performance, they take back something that they have been needing, and we have to remember to deliver, and also play music that people can, that music that they can absorb in their soul, that touches their soul. It doesn't have to be something that's cerebral, and then they need to be concentrating on what type of chords you're playing, or how many scales and how fast you can play. You have to play something that touches the soul, and because music, it was intended for the people. I always like to reflect on an interview that Louis Armstrong did with the BBC, and the interviewer asked Louis, said, "Mr. Armstrong, is your music folk music?" And Louis thought for a couple of seconds and said, "Yes, it is music, folk music. It's music for folks." And I think that said a mouthful to me. It says, I mean, the music is for the people, and I think as musicians, we are selfish if we don't play music that people can feel and that they can relate to, that they can get some enjoyment out of, because most people in the world can't even clap their hands on 2 and 4. So, and hold a note. So, but they're coming out there because they want to get something, and they want to feel something deep down, something that they can't touch, but they can feel it, and it first comes to them through what they hear, and of course what they see, but even more importantly what they hear, that from the sound of your voice or your instrument that makes them feel lifted.
You better preach. If I was next to you right now, I would have whipped out my tambourine and we would have just taken a break. You spoke some good words. You spoke about the message of music. That music is serving a purpose. It's not just individualistic, but it's supposed to spread something. I really believe that musicians, vocalists included, we're anointed. If you have the gift and then you have that opportunity to share your gift with the world, it's a responsibility that you must share something like for the next generations and the generations after that. So I'm so happy. I know that's why I liked you. I know I liked you. I could hear it in your playing. I feel it all the time. The pandemic, the global shutdown. Personally, that was the first time in my lifetime that I saw everybody from bottom to top, left to right. We were all on the same page. None of us could go outside. All of us had to shelter in place. We all had the same restrictions, regardless of color, class, creed. Personally, I'm not the same person I was before the pandemic, and I think my whole essence reflects that. Tell me about you and your experience. Do you feel that there has been some sort of shift or evolution in your approach to music since the pandemic?
And I meant to elaborate more on the process of March of the Toddlers because it was recorded during the midst of the pandemic. Actually, yes, I know that I have been affected, and I guess sometimes I try to ignore it. The main thing is that what I had missed so much is getting to play and interact with other musicians live. We did the recording session in August of 2020, and I was initially going to use trumpet, the trombone, and tenor saxophone, like many of my other ensembles, for the recording, and with the rhythm section. So the other two horn players were leery about being in the studio for so many hours together that long, and I can understand that, even though we had isolation. So I had to rethink the horns parts to adapt them for just the three trumpets or three flugelhorns with mutes and to employ some different sounds and of course the rhythm section. There is Paul Longstreth, Nobuo Ozaki, and Barnaby Gold, and they're in the room. We're all spaced pretty well. The engineers, we're the only 5 people in the studio. Rhythm section was where they wore their masks all the time, even when we're in the booth, etc. It was a bit weird. It was a weird feeling, but we did the best we could to keep each other safe and be safe, because we know you never know. And so, of course, the recording was mixed and mastered, and then it was in the can for until now, until recently. Actually, Katya does the graphic artwork. We went to Finland with the kids for a year. We left in August, after a week or so after the recording, and stayed till August 2021. When we came back August 2021, there was another surge, and people would say, "Why are you going back home to New Orleans?" So, well, we got to go back. We have a house. Plus, we miss it. We miss the scene. Our friends there, my family that's here, the musicians, the music. Fortunately, we could listen to WWOZ on the live wire, on the air, online, wherever we were, to keep us in the spirit of New Orleans. And so gigs were canceled. There were some tours overseas that were canceled that I had. It was a bit to the point of depression almost, because as artists, we have to maintain motivation to create and to just want to practice our craft. Vocalists, instrumentalists, everybody, we need that. We have to be motivated. And when something like what happened with this pandemic, it almost, I mean, some guys stopped practicing completely and stopped practicing their crafts completely because they didn't have a desire and they didn't feel like, what am I doing it for? There's no audience to play for. I mean, the virtual thing gets old very fast. And it was it was a hard pill to swallow, but I'm thankful that through perseverance and the grace of God, we made it through and kept our sanity. And me personally, I tried to keep my horn on my face as much as I could, so I can be prepared when the time comes for me to actually have to play and a gig and to work with other people and to perform at least on a level that I'm accustomed to playing at.
I'm going to say that discipline from your youth just kicked in, you know, because it takes a lot of discipline to stay ready and to be ready and not have a goal or a vision right in front of your face. But you know that opportunity is coming. And when that opportunity comes, you don't want to have to hustle and bustle and get ready. You're already ready for it. You're manifesting it. So wonderful words.
You know, trying. It's hard. I mean, I'd say that I have a reputation that I have to maintain, and a lot of the trumpeters, in particular trumpet players, are always putting me under the microscope. So I have, and my, so I have to. I try to maintain a level, even though over the past year and a half, 2 years, I must admit that I had not practiced every day like before the pandemic. If I wasn't playing a gig every other day or every day sometimes, I definitely had my home space every day, at least for an hour to 2 hours, and trying to go over some things, perfect some things, and work on new things. You know, jot down ideas for new songs, and just the more you play and you know, listening to other artists and other music to get inspiration. Yeah, I must admit that throughout the pandemic, I skipped some days. You
know? We forgive you. I think we all skipped some days. And I think the liquor store was full too. So I have one more question for you. You've been doing this for a long time. You've played with some of the greats. You yourself are one of the greats. If you could manifest currently your dream collaboration, who is somebody that you would love to collaborate with that you haven't had the opportunity to yet?
I would probably love to have been able to play in the brass band with in the trumpet section with Louis Armstrong, Clifford Brown, and Kenny Camp, and Freddie Hubbard, and Claude Terry, and these are, you know, people who have gone on to glory, of course, and I would love to have been in the section, and I think within a brass band context where there's a lot more elasticity, and you're able to play in the section and then improvise, and there's no sheet music, and it's a lot of fun, and I must say that leads me into what I would like to say about my next idea for a recording project is a brass band, a New Orleans brass band, Volume 2. I did 17 years ago. I recorded New Orleans brass band music, tribute to the Fairview and Hurricane Band. This one I'd like to call it New Orleans Brass Band Music Volume 2, and have Wendell Brunius as a featured guest with me on that particular recording.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Okay. You heard it here first, y'all. Leroy Jones and Wendell Brunius. That's going to be incredible. Wow. Well, thank you so much for making the time to speak with me and to share your music philosophy, to share your message, and of course, to share your music. Make sure that you give love to Kati and the babies. She does an excellent job with the graphic design. I didn't know that, so thank you for sharing. She's a woman of many hats.
Yes.
Wonderful. So thank you, Mr. Leroy Jones. And we, the station, myself, always support you. We're going to continue to support you.